Okay, so this one is not D&D related. This one is going to be a review-ish aftercare, because I do aftercares of D&D sessions. This is going to be about Elden Ring, because I just beat it last night. Go over some, I'm just going to go over some stuff. I don't think this video is going to be that long. Famous last words. So, overall, game's great. Game is fantastic. There's an absurd amount of content to do. It's an open world done very well. There's stuff everywhere. And something that, you know, the combat system is actually good, as opposed to like most open world games that just have like a really shitty, really superficial combat system that doesn't have a whole lot going on. This has a pretty standard Dark Souls combat system, so it works out. Like, there's always like generic enemies, for the most part, are usually threatening. I mean, if you go back to the starting area, it's when you're like over level 100, obviously that's going to be, you're going to just kind of steamroll everything. But it's basically everything you would expect from a new FromSoft game. The world design is exactly where it needs to be. Like, when I'm going to use the phrase, like, you know, a standard great FromSoft game, you know, it hits all the spots it needs to. The lore is interesting and obtuse and difficult to like really figure out until you find different clues. The characters are diverse and likable without being like too in your face. You know, it hits everything that it needs to be. Like, you can look at it and you're like, oh yeah, this is like almost a by the numbers FromSoft Souls style game. And that's a really good thing. Like, you can see the design everywhere. And it's like, okay, that's this type of character, that's this type of character. And then I end up liking it anyway. That it's like, oh yeah, I know exactly what's going to happen. Great. Like, it's exactly what I want. There's, like I said, there's tons of content. Yeah, it's like, it's a 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. It's a fantastic game. There isn't really a whole lot else I can say about that other than just game's really good. Like, even if you're not really into Souls games, this one is probably worth playing. It has a lot of ways to make the game more accessible. There's a lot of things you can do. The game gives you a lot more like varied tools. They might seem a bit weird and you might not realize it's a tool at first, but there's ways to mitigate the notorious difficulty of Souls games. Now I'm going to get into some of the issues I have with the game, I guess, because that's like the only thing like to really talk about other than game's fantastic, go play it. So first I'll just start with some mechanical stuff. So what it does right with a lot of the mechanics in the combat system is it takes like the weapon art system from Dark Souls 3, which was barely a system, if you can call it that, and it makes it much more customizable. So if there's a particular weapon that you like, but it has a crappy weapon art you don't like, you can swap it out. You can change it to something else, and that lets you change your weapon scaling to change from, like, you know, scale more with like strength, with more dex. You can get like magic damage on it, scaling with your intelligence, scaling with whatever. It's a lot more customizable, which is a really great system. The only criticism there centered around Ashes of War is, one, there's a general complaint I have with power stancing, which I'll get into when I talk about power stancing. But my only real complaint is like that a lot of the there's a lot of the somber weapons. These are weapons that use a different upgrade system than the normal weapons, and you can't swap out their Ash of War. These weapons, it's where you find a lot of like the boss skills. Like in particular, one that I loved is Malekith, Malekith's Black Blade. His sword has the Destined Death weapon art, where it's this big slash, then you thrust the weapon into the ground, and then there's like a aura of multi-slashes around you. And that's a super cool weapon art. I wasn't as into the colossal sword that it's attached to. And I'm using it and it's cool, but I'm much more of a power stance 2-weapon kind of guy. So, or a scythe kind of guy. So if that weapon art were an Ash of War that you could throw on other weapons, I would be super happy, but it's not. So I think a lot of the more like boss-centric, like boss signature move Ashes of War, or signature moves that are Ashes of War, usually on that boss's like remembrance weapon. I think those could just be Ashes of War instead, or as well. Like when you get the weapon, you also unlock that Ash of War. I think it could be a bit more open. Next, the upgrade system in general, it's split. Weapons are split into 2 categories. Normal weapons, which you can swap out their Ashes of War, and like what usually are called like somber weapons or legendary weapons or special weapons. Actually, not legendary, because that's a separate category, which is barely a category. But like these weapons are not infusible, and they use 2 different upgrade systems. The somber weapons use a very simple upgrade system where you need somber smithing stones, and you need 1. So like to take a weapon from 0 to +1, you need a somber stone +1. Or you need a somber stone 1. Then to take it to +2, you need 1 somber stone 2. And somber stone 3, and so forth, so on and so forth, until you get up to +10. Normal weapons, it doesn't work that way. For some reason, the way it works is instead of having smithing stone 1 through 9 and then like the special legendary ancient dragon one at the end to get the +10 with the max, normal weapons go up to +25, and the smithing stones are broken down into 8 categories. There's smithing stone 1 through 8. And then to get the +1, you need two smithing stone 1s. To get the +2, you need 4 smithing stone 1s. And to get the +3, you need 6 smithing stone 1s. And then it repeats that all the way up to like when you're using smithing stone 8s to get the +24, and then you need an ancient dragon one to get to the final upgrade. It's just like goofily complicated, and also even though the game tends to throw more normal smithing stones at you, I still found myself constantly out of them. Whereas if I was using a somber weapon, it would always be like I would have had it at like +7 way sooner in the game than like I would have had my normal weapons the equivalent upgrade path or upgrade level at the same point. Like it's just like weirdly annoying to upgrade normal weapons. Like it encourages you to use the somber weapons instead, which was, it's not a big design flaw, but it's an annoyance, and it's something that could have been toned down. Just keep the normal weapons also 1 +1 to +10, and use the same system of it takes 1 upgrade stone, and just throw less of them at the player. Like, you know, you can scale that down. It's not hard, but you know, that's a relatively minor complaint. Next, probably my biggest complaint about the way the weapons are set up generally, almost everything is viable in a way that it sort of hasn't been in previous games. Like, yeah, in previous games you could beat the game with anything, but like, thanks to the customizable Ash of War system, like I said earlier, you find a weapon you like, but it's got a shitty weapon art, you can change it. Like in Dark Souls 3, I was using the Great Corvian Scythe, and that thing's weapon art was trash. So I just didn't have a weapon art for this weapon, basically. Not a thing in this game, and that was a big positive change. And in this game, they also brought back what's called power stancing, or just dual wielding. And for the most part, it's done very well. Like, you just grab two weapons of a similar type, like, as in two straight swords, two curved swords, two battle axes, or two axes, two maces, two whips. As long as they're the same type of weapon, they don't have to be the exact same weapon. Like, you can have a battle axe and a Highland axe, but they're both axes, so they work. And when you do that, you grip them both, it changes what's normally your lock button to a double swing button. And you can get out, roughly twice as many attacks in the same time frame with using two weapons. But the trade-off is supposed to be like defense, because you can't block. And I think that's both a bigger problem than the designers initially thought, and also kind of less of a problem with how powerful power stancing in general is. So, in addition, like, you still have your normal lights and heavies as if you were just one-handing the weapon, which I think is a missed opportunity. Basically, I would much have preferred it if power stance attacks changed your normal light attacks. Like, you just didn't have your normal light attacks anymore. You just had the power stance ones. And you got, like, a new heavy attack that was, like, chargeable or not, whatever. That would be more animations to do, but it's only, like, an animation set. Like, a set of new heavy attacks for each weapon type. It's not that many. Animations are animations. They're always gonna, they're always gonna be difficult. But then that block button would stay your block button, and I think that would be that would keep the game kind of more grounded, and because basically what ends up happening when you're power stancing is you just don't use your normal lights anymore. You just don't use them, and then sometimes you might use a heavy attack. But what it really does is make it so you only really have one attack that you're going to do, because it's so much better than everything else you have. And for some weapon setups, your normal light is going to be a good deal faster and less committal. But as far as I'm concerned, that's part of the price you pay for power stancing. I think that would just be a smoother overall design. It feels a bit janky sometimes with power stancing, and especially how wildly balanced some of it is. For the most part, every weapon type power stanced is going to do more damage than their non-power stanced setup. So, double straight swords is better than a single straight sword if you're just looking at pure damage output. There's a lot of other factors to consider. But certain weapon types, namely one-handed axes, one-handed maces, one-handed flails, their power stance moveset is garbage. Does the same, they're the same weight class as straight swords and curved swords. So one-handed, they're roughly the same speed and do roughly the same damage and stagger and stuff. But when power stanced, their moveset, the power stance moveset has this really cool, these weighty animations, but they don't do any extra damage, they don't do any extra stagger, they don't do any extra anything. They do the same damage on hit, but are way slower to swing than if you were just taking the one axe and swinging it over and over. More or less. It's not a good look. To the point, I was most of the way through the game using 2 axes for most of the game, and then I came up against started coming up against the Godskin bosses, and I started to struggle against them. And then I switched to curved swords, and my damage output quadrupled because I was doing roughly the same amount of damage on hit, but I was attacking 3 times faster. And not only could I put out more attacks in the same time span, putting out a single attack would take way less time, so I could fit those attacks into smaller openings on the boss without getting punished as a result. So, that's just a small design flaw there. Those weapon types, axes, maces, hammers, those weapons really should have either their power stance movesets just sped up to be in line with the rest of the game, of the similar weighted weapons, or just fucking give them more damage in power stance and more stagger or something. You got to give them something to actually make them worth using over straight swords and curved swords. Because otherwise, you can use them and beat the game just fine with them. But if you're comparing stats and numbers and stuff, you're not going to use these. If you're going to use single, small, normal axes, battle axes, you're better off using 2 great axes. You'll swing them at the same speed and do more damage. Way more damage. So, it was kind of dumb. That was a big complaint that I kind of had, but it was mitigated. I switched to curved swords and I had a better time. Otherwise, some of my next complaint, I guess in some cases there's a little too much to do. There's a lot of stuff, but that's a really minor complaint. This is all I'm going to say on that. Some of the NPC quests are super weird to actually do them, because it's like a standard Dark Souls kind of design, where an NPC, you start their quest, you talk to them, do this part, and then they move on to a different area, and you have to find them somewhere else to continue their quest. And for the most part, it makes sense because the Souls games are fairly linear in where you're supposed to go. Don't talk to me about Dark Souls 1 open-ended design. I don't care. But, it's fairly easy to find them. Sometimes you might have to look it up and see exactly where they are, but generally, they just move forward and into the next area, and you can find them again pretty easily. In this game, that's not the case. There were several NPCs that I just missed, because, either they're tucked away behind an alley somewhere in an area that, you're just running through, which I guess, should reward constant, combing over everything. But you're gonna miss stuff. And then sometimes they go back to an earlier area that you have no reason to visit. There's absolutely no reason to go back there. It's just a bunch of skeletons. You already picked up the item. And, there might be a vague hint that that's where they're going sometimes. But there is reward to, finding stuff. But in some cases, it's a little too obtuse. And I recognize that in the same way, if you just had the NPC hey, I'm going to go over here. Bye. That would also be kind of less satisfying. But, I don't know, something would help, I guess. Some kind of hint, something. I don't know. The NPC could talk about how they plan on doing this, and then maybe they get stuck along the way to that goal, and you find them, on the road leading up to the place they're going. Relatively minor complaint. But the only other real kind of complaint I have is some of the bosses are really weird. the game gives you lots of tools to deal with stuff, but it also just kind of throws a boss at you and just assumes you have tools to deal with it and lets you figure it out, which is usually very good. That's usually the boss design I love. But there are some bosses with some sequences of things they can do, or like meta stuff around the boss that makes it not like overly difficult, but annoying. Like, sometimes a boss will just have a really annoying run-up, like the Dragon Lord Placidusax. He has a really annoying boss run-up. There's no... They have these Stakes of Marika, which is a great system. You know, a little minor checkpoint right before a boss so you can spawn right there and just run back in. But he doesn't have one, and his run-up, you start at the top of an elevator. This is the closest site of grace. Closest bonfire. You start up at the top of an elevator, you have to ride it down, go past these 3 beast men, and then do a little minor platforming section, and then go through a cutscene to get to the boss again. And it's like, kind of annoying. I feel like there could be a Stake of Marika right there at the start of the arena, like right where you kind of spawn into his special area. And it would just make it less annoying. Otherwise, Placidusax was a fantastic boss. I loved that boss. But it was just his run-up made it kind of annoying. And there's been worse run-ups in the past, don't get me wrong, in previous games. But they got so many of them right, and then just kind of dropped the ball on this one. But that's a relatively minor one. There's also one boss where there is a Stake of Marika, but it's bugged. I'm not going to harp on that one. But then certain other bosses just have like inherent stuff in their design that's just annoying. Like the big one is Melania. Having beat her now, like, she is generally, like, I really like her as a character and her general boss design. But she has some properties that make her really annoying to deal with. She has this constant health regen, which whenever she hits you, she recovers life, which is a cool mechanic, and makes it so that getting hit by her matters even more, because she can undo the damage that you do to her. And so, like, it makes it so that, like, your flasks, like, she kind of drains the flasks even faster in a certain way when you think about it, because whenever she hits you, your health and resources versus her health swings even farther than if she had just done damage to you directly. That's an interesting mechanic that I really like. She has a lot of attacks that are really difficult to get away from. She's really fast, she has a lot of range. But she also doesn't have a lot of poise, and she's pretty easy to stagger. She has like 2 attacks that like really stick out for me. The first one is like her kind of, what I'm going to call her like trick weapon rush, where she like changes her grip on her sword, it sparks really quick, and then she darts up to you and does a really quick 3-slash combo, and then a 4th like roll catching combo, so that if you time your rolls just slightly wrong, it's going to catch you. And I think if you're still in range for it, there's no real way for you to completely avoid this just through rolling. So like, to beat this boss properly, you have to space her out and fight her at more of a mid-range and just whiff punish her more. But then sometimes you can stagger her at the same time. So there's multiple ways to go about it. And then the other big move is the Waterfowl Dance. The Waterfowl Dance, which is a big, like a long-winded attack. She darts at you and does this it's like, it lasts for like 10 seconds or so. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it lasts for a really long time, and she does constant multi-hit attacks all around her and chases you down while she's doing it. So, it's extremely difficult to get away from. And if you get hit by the whole thing, you're dead. And even if you block it or get hit a little bit by it, she's recovering life. And there's no real way to, like, directly deal with it. Like, the best way to deal with it is, like, keep spacing her out, and when she starts to do it, run backwards, and then just keep running backwards and time some rolls on, like, the second and third, like, rush of this attack. And the problem with the move isn't, like, the move itself. It's that it's much harder to deal with than the entire rest of her moveset. And it is way more threatening than the entire rest of her moveset. It's like, in D&D, like a dragon's breath weapon that's on a recharge. It's that kind of thing, which I think is really cool in concept. But it's the type of thing, like, it forces your player to figure out a way to deal with these things. Yeah, it's like those two things are, like, kind of issues that stick out. And then also she does this thing where she can cancel out of animations whenever, like, on a whim. There's no rhyme or reason when she's going to do it. She just kind of does it sometimes. Like, in particular, whenever she gets, like, knocked down, like, you can hit her the whole time she's on the ground, and then she kind of slowly gets up, and then will do something. But sometimes she'll just kind of backdash out of it in the middle of her getting up animation, which was really weird. And this is the other problem that a lot of bosses have in general. They have a lot of, like, optional things that they can do in the middle of other animations. Like, they, like, Margit is a big one. He does, like, an attack chain. And then he has, sometimes, if you try to punish this opening, sometimes he'll just pull out his knife and shank you. And sometimes he won't. And there's no... And it's just... And you can't react to it. Like, if you took this option, opening to punish, you're getting hit. So it's just kind of... it's just kind of goofy. Whether it's going to happen or not. And it's inconsistent, which causes you to just kind of shy away from taking certain openings. And, like, that's the biggest problem, the inconsistency. That's probably, like, my biggest problem with a lot of the bosses in general. They have this inconsistency to them, where sometimes they'll cancel out of stuff. I guess the only other thing, like, some of the bosses have, like, way more, like, highly delayed attacks. Like, Margit's another big one. He has this attack where he raises his staff above his head, and then he just kind of threatens you with it. And this threatening state can last anywhere from, like, 3 seconds to, like, 8-10 seconds. And there's, like, no tell for when exactly he's going to swing. His weapon just comes down. And those can build tension, but they're just a bit goofy. Maybe they could have had a better secondary tell. Like, they cock the weapon and go into this stance, and then right before they swing, they flex again, and then bring the weapon down, instead of just bringing the weapon down. Which, that was generally something that would, like, a lot of the animations would kind of get me in this game. Things like, the way the animations looked to me, I would react to them early. Like, certain weapon swings on larger enemies, they would bring their axe back, and then they would dash forward and go into this, and then, like, kind of drop their shoulder and start moving. And I would dodge there, but then their axe would, like, grind on the ground a little bit and slide for half a second and then come out. Just some of the animations were, like, on the deceptive side, and I was reacting early to them at points that looked like the weapon was going to come through, but it wouldn't. So that kind of stuff got me a lot. And that's kind of like me. I'm, like, a more reactive player when it comes to these games. So, like, Bloodborne didn't have this issue because it knew your only defensive action was to dodge. So, most of the animations enemies had were very direct, and it was obvious what's going to happen. Like, Dark Souls is a lot more, or Souls and Elden Ring is a lot more all over the place. Yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. I guess the other complaint is I tend to like a lot of the more end game weapons, so I ended up kind of rushing to Malekith to get his sword, and that resulted in me like skipping over a lot of the optional stuff, and I was slightly over leveled for a lot of it, but it was fine. I didn't have too much trouble with the last 3 bosses, with Horaloo, Radagon, and the Elden Beast. I didn't have much issue with them. Like, the boss that I was probably stuck on the most was, I think, like, Margit, the Valiant Gargoyle double fight, and Melania. Those were the 3 bosses that I was stuck on the most. So, yeah, that's my review of Elden Ring. Good game. Bye.